Good evening, friends. Settle yourself. Let the light in your room dim to a soft amber glow. Maybe there's a cup of tea at your bedside. Nothing dramatic, just quietly fragrant. If it feels right, take a sip now. The world can wait a little while longer. Tonight, we'll drift through gentle history, the kind that never rushes, the kind that lets you fall asleep halfway through a sentence and still feel you've learned something. And if this calm journey helps you unwind, perhaps tap like or subscribe, only if it feels right. No pressure, just breathe. Now, imagine the hush before dawn somewhere along the Yangtze River in the early 1900s. The water moves in broad silver strokes, so wide that a small fishing boat seems swallowed by its reflection. The riverbanks are misty with wood smoke. A farmer ties his sampan to a crooked pole, yawning in that deep, lung-stretching way that makes the body heavier in the best sense. This was China before the Great Storm, a world of tea and textile, of poets and porters, of provinces where time ambled like an old water buffalo. Yet beneath the quiet, the ground was already trembling with change. Empires rarely fall with thunderclaps. They sigh first. I like to think of the late Qing dynasty as a candle burning unevenly, its wax pooling on one side, still giving light, but flickering whenever the door opens. In those final decades before 1911, the dynasty had grown old and rather set in its ways, as dynasties do. Confucian scholars debated in dusty courtyards. Foreign traders, with their clipped English and sharp suits, argued over tariffs in Shanghai's treaty ports. Imagine walking through such a port at dusk. The scent of river mud mixed with coal smoke. The faint sound of a phonograph playing something Western that doesn't quite fit the mood. Children chase each other between rickshaws. Lanterns swing overhead, red and gold, though most are fading from years of weather. Somewhere, someone is discussing revolution in a tea house, but softly, as if the idea itself might overhear and take offense. China had endured thousands of years of dynastic rhythm. Rise, flourish, decline, repeat. But the early 1900s were different. The empire's borders were being tested by foreign powers, its economy strained, and the new ideas, liberty, republic, democracy, floated in from Japan and Europe like dandelion seeds. You could pluck one from the air, turn it in your hand, and wonder what it might grow into. Among the people stirred by those ideas was a doctor from Guangdong named Sun Yat-sen. I imagine him at his desk, oil lamp flickering, drafting plans for a China reborn, not as an empire, but a republic. His handwriting precise yet hurried, the kind of penmanship that hints at someone thinking faster than their hand can keep up. He believed China could awaken, stretch its arms, and start anew. And it did, in 1911, when the Qing dynasty finally toppled. The emperor, a child named Puyi, was still learning his characters when the adults around him decided that 2 millennia of imperial rule were enough for now. The new Republic of China promised light, modernity, and railroads. But revolutions are messy. The moment the old palace gates closed, 1,000 provincial doors opened, each revealing a different warlord who fancied himself the next great leader. The dream of unity drifted apart like river reeds after a storm. Let's pause here. Imagine that wide Yangtze again, but this time filled not with reflections of clouds, but of soldiers' helmets. The 1920s brought rifles to the rice paddies. China was split among warlords, each carving out a realm, collecting taxes, raising armies. The people, farmers, merchants, scholars, simply tried to live between battles. When I picture that time, I think of a tailor in Hunan, bent over his sewing machine, listening for distant artillery while still threading his needle. Life rarely stops for politics. The rice must still be cooked, the hem still stitched. From this fractured land, two movements began to rise like twin rivers flowing from opposite mountains, one red, one blue. They would whine, cross, and crash against each other for decades. The Blue River was the Kuomintang, or Nationalist Party, founded by Sun Yat-sen, and later led by a disciplined soldier named Chiang Kai-shek. The Red River was the Communist Party, small at first, barely a ripple, led by thinkers like Mao Zedong, who once worked as a librarian in Beijing. Imagine him there, surrounded by dusty volumes, quietly radicalized by the scent of old paper and the word equality. In 1927, those rivers collided. The nationalists, having once cooperated with the communists against the warlords, turned their guns inward. The Shanghai Massacre, a name that sounds sharp even when whispered. Thousands were killed, and the survivors scattered across the countryside. Picture Mao fleeing into the hills of Jiangxi. The forests thick, the nights cold, the stars the only witnesses. In those hidden valleys, the communists began to organize, their whispers turning into a movement. They studied peasants' lives, shared rice, and wrote manifestos by lamplight. Each page was an act of stubborn hope. Meanwhile, in the bustling cities, Chiang Kai-shek wore tailored uniforms and dreamed of a unified modern China under the nationalist banner. He built railways, sent students abroad, and cultivated a sense of national pride, though often through strict control. If you listen carefully, you can almost hear the competing rhythms. Mao's slow, deliberate march through the countryside versus Chiang's quick, polished steps on marble floors. Two men envisioning the same nation, but walking in opposite directions. The 1930s deepened the contrast. As both sides prepared to outmaneuver each other, a third force arrived, the Japanese Empire. In 1931, Japan seized Manchuria. By 1937, it invaded much of China outright. The two rival Chinese factions, nationalist and communist, were forced into an uneasy alliance against the invaders. Let's slow down here, take a long breath. Imagine the soundscape. Train whistles echoing through dark tunnels, the shuffle of refugees crossing bridges, the hiss of rain on tin roofs. Somewhere, a child hums to stay calm. History, when you zoom close enough, always comes down to one person trying to keep warm. That alliance, fragile as it was, held through the war years. Yet beneath the cooperation, resentment simmered like tea left too long on the stove. The nationalists fought in open battle, while the communists, often outnumbered, wove through the hills, building loyalty among peasants who had little left to lose. By 1945, when Japan surrendered, both sides emerged exhausted yet triumphant in their own minds. And that's where the story of two Chinas truly begins, not from ideology alone, but from geography, fatigue, and pride. I often think of 1945 as that quiet moment when rain stops, but the clouds don't clear. People breathe easier, but the air still feels heavy. Villages celebrated the end of war with lanterns and noodles, unaware that another, deeper conflict was just beginning. In the months after Japan's defeat, the nationalists moved swiftly to reclaim cities and rebuild authority. The communists spread through the countryside, promising reform and land to farmers. Each side believed it was the true heir to China's future. Imagine standing on a hill somewhere in Henan province, looking east toward the coast and west toward the mountains. The fields are gold with autumn grain. Below, two groups of soldiers march in different directions, their songs overlapping in the valley wind. That's how divided China was. Two melodies in one key, refusing to harmonize. As 1946 rolled in, peace talks failed. Gunfire resumed. It was less like a single explosion and more like rain starting again after a brief lull. Villages switched allegiance depending on who arrived first. Families hung two flags just in case. This was the Chinese Civil War, a struggle not only for land and power, but for the meaning of China itself. To the nationalists, China was a republic striving for modernization and global recognition. To the communists, it was a revolution waiting to lift millions from poverty. And somewhere between them were countless villagers who simply wanted rice in their bowls and roofs that didn't leak. The late 1940s were brutal years. Yet, even here, life's smaller rhythms continued. Markets reopened, children learned calligraphy, poets wrote about resilience. History may be violent, but memory can be gentle. By 1949, the Red River had grown wide and unstoppable. Mao's forces swept south, city by city, while Chiang Kai-shek's government packed its archives, its gold reserves, and a fraction of its military onto ships bound for Taiwan. Picture the harbor of Shanghai that winter. Cranes groaning, crates stacked like dominoes, a chill wind biting through wool coats. Soldiers bored with uncertain eyes. Bureaucrats clutch briefcases as if they contain not papers, but the very idea of China. Across the strait, Taiwan awaited. Green hills, sugarcane fields, Japanese-built railways, and a population unsure what the next chapter would bring. The people there had lived under Japanese rule for half a century. Now, suddenly, they were part of the Republic of China. That crossing, the moment when the nationalist government fled to Taiwan, was less a heroic escape than a weary exhale. A civilization carrying its books and memories across water. The kind of scene history paints in grand strokes, but that was, in truth, made up of trembling hands and quiet goodbyes. And so, two Chinas emerged, one on the mainland, red and revolutionary, the other on the island, blue and exiled. Yet if you listen to the sea between them, you might still hear both heartbeats, different tempos, same origin. Like those two rivers we met at the beginning, forever flowing, sometimes apart, sometimes near enough to taste each other's mist. As the waves lap against the shore, let your thoughts drift with them. The storm has passed for now. The air smells faintly of salt and smoke, of beginnings disguised as endings. And as we leave this chapter, these rivers, these echoes, let your eyes grow heavy. In our next quiet journey, we'll step ashore in Taiwan itself, to see how a tired government built a new world from exile, and how dreams of home lingered across the strait. For now, rest. The rivers will keep flowing without us. Welcome back, traveler. If you're still awake, perhaps just barely, that's perfectly fine. You're not meant to stay alert through every sentence of a boring history for sleep story. You're meant to float in and out, like a small paper boat caught between one dream and the next. Let's begin again. Softly. Adjust your blanket if you need to. Let your breath settle into something unhurried. When last we drifted off, the ships were leaving Shanghai, their hulls heavy with people, crates, memories, and unsaid apologies. The sky was grey, the sea restless, and ahead of them lay an island once known for sugar and camphor trees. Taiwan. Imagine approaching it from the deck of a transport ship in 1949. The sea air tastes metallic. Salt clings to your collar. You can't tell if that low hum in your ears is the engine or your own heartbeat. To the west lies the China you've left behind, crumbling, chaotic, loud. Ahead, misty mountains rise like blue-green ghosts. The sailors mutter that the Japanese built fine harbors here, though the empire that built them is gone now, vanished like smoke from a blown-out lantern. When Chiang Kai-shek's government arrived, Taiwan was no blank page. It already had sentences written in Japanese script and footnotes in local dialects. The nationalists were stepping into a story mid-paragraph. I picture the first morning after their arrival. Crates of documents stacked in customs houses, officers coughing from the damp sea air, and clerks trying to translate between Mandarin, Hokkien, and the lingering traces of Japanese bureaucracy. It must have felt like waking up in someone else's house, where even the light switches hum in another language. For the locals, life was suddenly filled with new slogans, new uniforms, and new uncertainties. For 50 years, from 1895 to 1945, Taiwan had been part of Japan's empire. Students wore sailor collars, trains ran on punctual timetables, and radio announcers spoke crisp Tokyo accents. Overnight, the voices changed. Mandarin crackled through the speakers now, warm but unfamiliar. And yet, in the quieter corners, tea stalls, fishing docks, tiny shrines, the rhythms continued almost the same. Farmers still tied bamboo hats against the sun. Shopkeepers still swept the same thresholds at dusk. The sky didn't seem to notice who ruled beneath it. The nationalist government called Taiwan a temporary capital, the word temporary doing a lot of hopeful work. They dreamed of returning to the mainland once they recovered it, as if China were a misplaced book and not a vast country now under communist rule. But days became months, and months became years. Taipei filled with the smell of army stew, tinned pork and noodles simmering in whatever was available. Soldiers built barracks that soon needed gardens. Bureaucrats opened offices that began collecting dust. Temporary things have a way of settling down. Imagine wandering through Taipei in the early 1950s. The streets hum with two energies, one anxious, one industrious. You hear the staccato of typewriters behind open windows, the honk of jeeps weaving past ox carts. Posters proclaim, "Retake the mainland," but the ink is fading under tropical rain. Somewhere in a noodle shop, a radio hums with Teresa Teng's soft voice, a melody so gentle it could wrap around your thoughts like a warm shawl. She hadn't become famous yet, but her kind of voice already existed in the island's air. Wistful, melodic, slightly homesick. For those who fled from China, Taiwan was both refuge and exile. They carried trunks of books, family seals, even handfuls of soil wrapped in paper, tokens of a homeland they believed they'd soon reclaim. I imagine one scholar unpacking his belongings in a wooden dormitory, finding that the humidity curls his manuscripts. He sighs and thinks, only for a little while. But a little while can stretch into a lifetime. By 1950, as the Korean War broke out and the world hardened into Cold War geometry, Taiwan's temporary government realized it might be here for a very long time. So they began to dig in, literally and figuratively. Fortifications rose along the coast. Archives were stored deep inland. Chiang Kai-shek's marble portrait appeared in schools. Every morning, students sang an anthem to a country they could no longer see from their classrooms. And yet, in small ways, life softened around the edges. The Taiwanese night markets, those fragrant labyrinths of sizzling oil and chatter, kept expanding. Fried squid, peanut ice cream rolls, steamed buns, all the comforts of both islands mixed under paper lantern light. Food, as it tends to do, became the most democratic form of unity. If you close your eyes, you can smell it. The sweetness of sugarcane juice poured over ice. the gentle hiss of dumplings meeting hot woks, a vendor calling out prices in a language that blends accents like paint on a wet canvas. Even politics can't ruin the smell of freshly grilled corn. During those years, Taiwan was under martial law, yet the island's natural beauty carried its own rebellion. The mountains were too tall to care about decrees. The sea kept whispering stories from other coasts. Students found small freedoms in poetry, music, and the simple act of watching the sunrise. There's something tender about people who build futures out of borrowed time. Factories rose from sugarcane fields, universities opened in former barracks, and radio stations broadcast lessons, lullabies, and cautious dreams. In 1958, as tension flared again across the Taiwan Strait, artillery shells fell on small islands like Kinmen. Yet even during bombardments, locals still brewed tea. The act of boiling water became a kind of quiet defiance, proof that ordinary life could outlast extraordinary fear. Tea, after all, has survived more empires than any army. By the early 1960s, a strange calm settled. The nationalist government remained firm in its claim as the legitimate China, holding its seat at the United Nations, while the mainland transformed under Mao's sweeping campaigns. Two different worlds evolving from one root, like twin bonsai trees trimmed by opposite gardeners. In Taiwan, the economy began to stir. Sewing machines clattered, shipyards rang, and export crates bore labels that said, "Made in Taiwan." Words that would, decades later, appear on nearly everything from transistor radios to toy robots. But at the time, it was modest, domestic, earnest work. I sometimes imagine a young woman in 1965 leaning over a factory table, stitching fabric by the rhythmic hum of fans. She hums to herself, not a revolutionary song, just a love tune. She doesn't know that her hands are helping build one of Asia's future tiger economies. To her, it's just another night shift. History often hides in such small sounds. The whir of a machine, the scrape of a chopstick on porcelain. Meanwhile, across the water, the other China was marching to a very different rhythm. Communes, slogans, mass movements. From afar, Taiwan watched with a complicated mix of sorrow and relief, grateful to be spared, but haunted by kinship. Families separated by a narrow strait sent letters that never arrived. The waves became their mail carriers, whispering unfinished sentences. Let's linger there for a moment. The idea of distance you can see. Imagine standing on the shore of Taiwan's western coast on a clear night. You might just glimpse the faintest glow on the horizon, too far to name, too close to ignore. The sea breeze brushes your hair. The air smells of brine and nostalgia. Somewhere, a fisherman adjusts his net, unaware he's part of a poem. Through the 1970s, the island's dream of returning to the mainland began to fade, replaced by something quieter but steadier. A sense of belonging right where they were. When the United Nations recognized Beijing as the sole China in 1971, many in Taipei felt the world tilt. The nameplates changed, but the island remained exactly where it had always been, green and humming. In a way, that's when Taiwan began to find itself, not as a stand-in, but as a self. Universities filled with debate. Artists painted waves instead of flags. And though political restrictions lingered, imagination found loopholes. A novelist could set a story in a dream rather than a province, and readers would understand what it meant. The 1980s brought color television and cautious reforms. The martial law that had blanketed the island for nearly 4 decades was finally lifted in 1987. It was as if someone had opened a window in a long sealed room. The first gust of free air startled everyone. You could almost hear the island exhale. Students held hands in protest lit by candles. Old soldiers visited temples to pray for peace instead of victory. Families began tracing relatives across the strait, wondering if anyone still remembered the same lullabies. Taiwan's borrowed dreams were slowly turning into its own, stitched from memories, but new all the same. As the 1990s dawned, Taiwan became something beautifully paradoxical. A land still calling itself the Republic of China, yet increasingly confident in its Taiwanese heartbeat. Skyscrapers rose beside banyan trees. Bubble tea, yes, that modern miracle of sweetness and tapioca, became a symbol of the island's creativity, familiar yet playfully original. I sometimes think of bubble tea as the perfect metaphor for Taiwan, something born from borrowed ingredients, shaken together into its own rhythm, delightfully unnecessary yet entirely irresistible. By the time the 21st century arrived, Taiwan had quietly built one of the most advanced economies in the world. Microchips replaced sugar as its export lifeblood. The old dream of retaking the mainland had become a bedtime story, told only in history class, while a new dream of democracy, identity, and quiet persistence filled the island's nights. And still, across the strait, the two Chinas gaze at each other like reflections that shift when the tide changes, never touching, never quite fading. Let's pause here, as the waves murmur and streetlights blink awake one by one. You can almost hear scooters purring through Taipei's narrow lanes, mingling with the distant call of a night market vendor. It's a symphony of routine, comforting in its ordinariness. Taiwan's story is still one of borrowed dreams, but perhaps all dreams are borrowed until they find the right dreamer. So take a deep breath. Let your shoulders loosen. The sea between these two lands will keep whispering through the night, and we'll follow it again soon. Now, as we leave this island under its blanket of mist and neon, let your mind drift toward the mainland once more, toward the quiet beginnings of a nation rebuilding itself from ashes. The other half of this story waiting in silence. Sleep if you wish. The waves will tell the rest. Good evening again, my friend. If you've drifted in and out since our last story, that's perfectly all right. That's what this is for. Let your thoughts soften like lantern light on water. Adjust your pillow. The world beyond your window can wait. Tonight, we'll cross the sea, not with engines or fanfare, but with imagination. We'll return to the other shore, to the China that remained behind after 1949, the mainland, a land that forgot to sleep for nearly half a century. Imagine standing on a railway platform in Beijing, the winter of 1949. The air smells of coal smoke and cabbage stew. Soldiers in thick cotton uniforms march past, their breath visible in the icy air. Somewhere in the distance, a bell clangs, a new era beginning its shift. The red flags have just gone up. Mao Zedong has proclaimed the birth of the People's Republic of China, and millions of ordinary people, weary from decades of war, whisper the same fragile hope. Maybe now, finally, we can rest. But history has a way of confusing peace with projects. In the 1950s, rest was replaced by rebuilding. Cities cleared rubble and grew factories. Villages organized cooperatives. The rhythm of the land changed from the soft shuffle of markets to the synchronized march of plans. Imagine it. The steady clank of steel, the whistle of new trains, the hum of loudspeakers declaring slogans like lullabies that no one could quite sleep through. I sometimes picture the young men of that decade, calloused hands gripping shovels, dreaming of a nation reborn through labor, and the women rolling up sleeves, joining work brigades, tying red scarves around their hair. It was a time of earnest exhaustion, the kind of tired that feels righteous. Factories sprouted like mushrooms after rain. The Great Leap Forward, they called it. The words themselves had a kind of magic: forward, progress, future. But leaps, as we know, can be tricky when the ground is uneven. Let's slow down for a moment. Picture a small rural commune in 1958. The dawn is grey, the fields wide and quiet. A rooster crows, slightly off tempo. The commune bell rings, summoning villagers to start the day's labour. They're told they're part of something immense, transforming grain into greatness, backyard furnaces into national pride. A boy stirs ashes under a steel pit, watching sparks leap like fireflies. He doesn't know that these tiny furnaces will melt not just metal, but illusions. The fields, once generous, are overworked. Grain quotas rise like impossible promises. Famine creeps in, not with drama, but with quiet subtraction. A smaller bowl of rice, another neighbour gone. There's a stillness to hunger that history books rarely capture. It's not noise, it's silence, the kind that hums behind the eyes. And yet, through all this, the people endure. They always do. Villagers still find reasons to laugh, to share, to hum songs while mending clothes. Somewhere, an old woman carves a spoon from bamboo, her hands slow but steady. In that simple act, the soul of China survives, patient, stubborn, quietly unbreakable. By the early 1960s, the Great Leap had stumbled. The government shifted course, the slogans softened. But the momentum of revolution doesn't stop easily. In 1966, the Cultural Revolution began, another great storm in a century already soaked. Imagine the air filled with chants, posters, and the rustle of little red books. Students marched through cities, proclaiming a new purity of thought. Old temples were shuttered. Teachers stood trembling before their pupils. It was a time when even silence could be suspicious. And yet, somewhere, a calligrapher hid his brushes in a teapot. A painter buried his scrolls beneath the floorboards. Memory has always known how to hide. I think often of the contradictions of that era, so loud, yet so lonely. Even Mao, from his high office, wrote poetry about quiet mountains and rivers, as if he too longed for the peace he could not permit. Still, the countryside lived on. Farmers planted because the soil didn't care for ideology. It responded only to rain. Children learned to fish, to weave nets, to whisper jokes that would get them scolded if spoken too loudly. Through the 1970s, something subtle began to change. The long fever of revolution started to cool. In 1976, Mao died. It was as if an enormous drum had stopped beating, and for a moment, no one knew what to do with the silence. That autumn, Beijing's sky turned the color of wet paper. Crowds filled Tiananmen Square with wreaths, photographs, and tears they weren't sure were permitted. The era of one man had ended, but the story of one nation was far from over. Then came a new rhythm, quieter, practical, surprisingly hopeful. In 1978, under the leadership of Deng Xiaoping, China began to open its doors. Not wide at first, just a cautious crack. Enough for sunlight to slip through. Enough for the scent of the wider world to waft in. Imagine a market in Guangdong in 1982. A man sets up a stall selling fried dough and radios side by side. Children giggle at the strange sounds from foreign stations. Somewhere, a young woman sells oranges wrapped in plastic, a novelty. She doesn't know she's participating in history's softest revolution, commerce. Factories multiplied, this time not by decree, but by demand. Fields gave way to workshops, workshops to warehouses. The hum of machines replaced the rhetoric of manifestos. China was waking up, but not to speeches, to industry, to trade. I like to think of the 1980s as the nation's morning stretch, stiff from decades of rigid ideology, blinking into the light, rediscovering what it meant to dream. Students returned to classrooms. Artists unpacked forbidden paints. Streets filled with bicycles, their bells ringing like laughter. The color grey slowly gave way to blue jeans and neon signs. And yet, beneath that brightness, old questions lingered. Who were they now? What had they become? Could a nation of such immense memory learn to balance progress with peace? History, as always, offered no easy lullaby. In 1989, the world watched Tiananmen Square again, this time filled not with wreaths, but with students and banners, songs and hopes. And then, once more, silence, the kind that history both remembers and tries to forget. Still, China moved forward. Perhaps weary of tears, it turned its energy toward transformation. Cities like Shenzhen erupted from fishing villages into glass skylines almost overnight. Roads stretched like arteries across the landscape. Millions left farms for factories, carrying with them dreams folded like dumplings, small, warm, and full of yearning. By the late 1990s, the country's nights were lit not by candlelight, but by fluorescent ambition. Shanghai's skyline shimmered like circuitry. Beijing buzzed with construction cranes that looked like patient birds feeding on steel. The once exiled sleep of the nation had become a kind of productive insomnia, no longer chaos, but an endless hum of motion. And yet, in the countryside, in the quiet alleys where the air still smelled of steamed buns and wood smoke, life found its balance again. Grandparents told stories under plum trees. Children flew paper kites shaped like swallows. The sky, at least, remained the same vast, forgiving blue. Through it all, the memory of Taiwan lingered, unspoken, complicated, and deeply human. The mainland's textbooks called it a province. The island called itself a republic. But between those words, families sent postcards, scholars traded letters, and fishermen shared the same sea. The two Chinas had grown apart, but like twins separated at birth, they carried the same lullabies in their bones. By the early 2000s, as the rest of the world marveled at China's rise, the mainland's people were simply busy living, working late, eating dumplings by fluorescent light, scrolling through new inventions called internet cafes. Sleep was still scarce, but dreams were abundant. And in that tireless hum, something beautiful had quietly endured. The persistence of ordinary kindness, a neighbor lending sugar, a student helping an elder cross the street, the small gestures that outlast ideologies. When I think of this era, I don't see only skyscrapers. I see a noodle shop in Chengdu, its windows fogged from steam, laughter spilling out into the cold. A grandmother stirring broth, humming an old revolutionary tune, now stripped of meaning, turned into melody. China, vast and sleepless, found comfort in routine, the simple, grounding act of making tomorrow possible. And so, as our story drifts back toward the sea once more, we can see both shores now. One island, one continent, both shimmering under the same moonlight. The decades have blurred, but the tide still knows the way. Let your mind rest there for a moment, on that silver water between two worlds. The air hums with history, but is gentle now, like the whisper of a lullaby sung by a billion tired souls. As we close this chapter, feel the weight of the mainland's long, waking ease from your thoughts. Let it sink softly into the waves. In our next quiet journey, we'll drift into the shared horizon, the space between memory and hope, between one dream and another. For now, breathe deeply. The lights of Beijing fade behind us. The sea is calm, and the world, at last, feels ready to sleep again. Good evening again, friend. If your eyelids are heavy, that's just right. You don't need to stay awake for this part. The story will keep breathing softly on its own. The sea will remember for you. We're somewhere between two coasts now, between mainland China and Taiwan, drifting over the Taiwan strait. It's only about 100 miles across, yet it holds a century of memory. Tonight we'll float there a while, in that quiet water that separates and connects two worlds at once. Close your eyes and picture it. A moonlit expanse of dark blue, the air thick with salt and secrets. Fishing boats bob gently, their lanterns blinking like sleepy stars. Each one holds a few men bundled in jackets, sipping tea from enamel mugs, speaking in dialects that sound like cousins of each other. Some come from Fujian, some from Taiwan, but their laughter shares the same rhythm. The sea doesn't ask which flag they salute. It just rocks them endlessly. In the early 1950s, this strait was anything but peaceful. Gunboats prowled it like restless spirits, each side declaring ownership of the water. But the waves, patient as always, ignored them. They kept rolling from one shore to the other, erasing the edges of maps with every tide. I sometimes think of the strait as history's longest sigh, a breath held between separation and reunion. On clear days, from Taiwan's western beaches, you could see the faint outline of the mainland mountains. Old fishermen would point and say, "That's home." Young ones would shake their heads and reply, "No, this is." The conversation never ended. It simply echoed with the tide. By the 1970s, after decades of silence, the winds began to soften. The United States switched diplomatic recognition from Taipei to Beijing, and suddenly, the island and the mainland found themselves in new roles on the world stage. Yet even amid politics, something gentler was happening beneath the surface, a longing for connection that no policy could erase. Letters began to slip across the water, quietly, unofficially. Some were smuggled by sailors, folded into the seams of luggage. Others traveled through third countries, taking months to arrive. When they did, the envelopes were handled like relics. Inside a few faded photos, a recipe, a lock of hair, or a line written with trembling ink. "Are you still alive?" Imagine opening such a letter after 40 years. The handwriting, unfamiliar yet somehow known, like a voice you once heard in a dream. The paper smells faintly of sea air and longing. You sit by the window, tears forming not from sadness, but from relief. You are remembered. Those first connections were hesitant, like strangers meeting after a long separation. But they grew. By the late 1980s, as Taiwan began lifting travel restrictions, elderly parents crossed the strait for the first time in decades to see children who were now grey-haired. The airports became reunion halls. Tears, laughter, awkward silences, all mixed together like tea leaves in a pot. A woman from Taipei might arrive in Xiamen, carrying pineapple cakes, unsure whether to bow or hug. A man from Fujian might hand her a jar of preserved plums, saying, "I didn't know what you liked anymore." And somewhere behind them, the customs officer looks away politely, pretending not to cry. The strait had become a river again, slow, emotional, forgiving. Let's drift closer. Hear the water slap softly against the hull. Smell the diesel, the brine, the faint sweetness of oranges in the cargo hold. It's nighttime now, sometime around 1992. A ferry hums through the darkness, carrying not armies but traders, teachers, families. The captain keeps his voice low on the intercom, as if afraid to wake the sea. Half the passengers are awake, staring at the horizon. Half are asleep, dreaming of places they haven't seen in decades. A child asks his mother, "Which side is ours?" She smiles and says, "Both." In that simple answer lies the entire complexity of the Chinese Civil War's legacy. One nation divided, two societies matured apart, each holding a mirror that shows both resemblance and difference. Through the 1990s and early 2000s, the strait became busier. Cargo ships carried plastic toys, electronics, pineapples, and semiconductors, the new language of peace, trade. Businessmen crossed for deals, scholars crossed for conferences. The water that once carried soldiers now ferried spreadsheets and family reunions. But the sea never forgets. Beneath its calm surface lie wrecks from past battles. Silent reminders that harmony, like the tide, can always turn. When I think of the Taiwan Strait, I picture it not as a dividing line, but as a lullaby sung in two accents. On one shore, Mandarin tinged with island softness. On the other, the same tones shaped by northern wind. The words differ slightly, but the melody is the same. Even the food tells this story. Fujian's Minnan cuisine, with its oyster omelets and peanut soups, flows seamlessly into Taiwan's night markets. You could eat your way from one coast to the other and never notice where one flavor ends and another begins. Somewhere out there, a fisherman grills squid on his boat, the smoke curling upward like incense. He doesn't care which side invented the recipe. The ocean seasons everything equally. Let's pause here. Feel the rhythm of the waves under us. Hear the creak of the wooden hull, the gentle slap of water, the far-off sound of a radio playing an old Teresa Teng song. The moon represents my heart. Her voice, tender and unhurried, travels across the sea like a bridge made of melody. Both sides claim her. Both are right. In the early 2000s, direct flights finally opened. A miracle that felt almost mundane after so many decades. Business people commuted between Taipei and Shanghai in less time than it once took to send a letter. And yet, even as technology erased distance, the emotional space remained delicate, full of memory, full of care. I once read about a pilot who flew that route every week. He said the most beautiful moment was when the plane crossed the midpoint of the strait and the onboard map showed nothing but blue. For those few minutes, he said, we belong to no one and everyone. That's what the strait really is. A breathing pause between two identities, two dreams, two lullabies sung to the same moon. Now, picture that moon rising higher. Its reflection ripples across the water, split by the ship's wake but still whole in the sky. That's how history works, fractured below, complete above. For travelers who make this journey, the sea often becomes a mirror. Some look west and see the weight of tradition. Others look east and see possibility. Most just see waves, endlessly folding into each other, erasing and rewriting their own foam patterns every few seconds. The gentlest kind of forgetting. And in that forgetting, there is peace. The Taiwan Strait, once a battlefield, is now home to cargo routes, coral reefs, and migrating whales that couldn't care less about politics. Scientists on both sides even share data about those whales. Proof that cooperation, like water, finds its level when left alone. Imagine that. Beneath all the speeches and borders, two nations quietly agreeing to protect the same whales. It's the kind of poetic irony history rarely admits, but nature insists on it. As the night deepens, the wind grows softer, warmer. The The smell of sea salt mixes with the sweetness of diesel fuel and drying nets. Somewhere, a sailor hums to himself. Maybe a lullaby his grandmother taught him. Maybe a pop tune from a Taipei radio. The sound barely rises above the waves. He doesn't know it, but he's become part of the story. Another quiet voice bridging the strait between dreams. And now, as our boat drifts closer to morning, you might feel your own mind swaying with it, not toward one side or the other, but toward rest. The world's arguments fade with distance. What remains is the sound of the tide, the pulse of something ancient and human, the longing to belong, and the peace of realizing you already do. Let that sound cradle you. The sea is calm tonight. Both shores sleep under the same moon, and between them, between us, the water hums a single, endless lullaby. As we leave this chapter, imagine the sun beginning to rise over the horizon, painting both coasts gold. Tomorrow will come with new tides, new stories. But for now, stay here in this in-between, where history finally breathes easy. Drift a little longer, dream a little deeper. Because even in division, there can be rest. And as the waves fade into hush, we'll soon turn our gaze inland again, to the people who learned to live with this sea between them, and the quiet miracles they built on both shores. Good evening again, dear listener. If you've been drifting in and out, that's exactly as it should be. This isn't a story to grip. It's one to float through, like a feather gliding on the warm air. Take a slow breath in. Let it out. The sea from our last chapter is far behind us now, but his rhythm still hums in our chest. Tonight, we wander the mirrored worlds that grew up on opposite sides of that water. Two reflections of one story, shimmering in different lights. Let's begin with the morning on the island. Taiwan wakes early. Scooters buzz like bees in a warm field, zipping past breakfast stalls where soy milk steams in tin pitchers and flaky scallion pancakes crisp on griddles. The air smells of sesame oil and newspapers. Vendors shout greetings that double as jokes. The whole island hums in polite chaos, an orchestra of small routines. Imagine walking through Taipei's lanes in the 1990s, the kind of narrow alleys where balconies almost shake hands across the gap. Every corner holds something. A shrine, a cat, a man selling lottery tickets with the patience of a saint. Radios murmur old ballads. The rain comes often and softly, turning the asphalt into mirrors of neon. This Taiwan is confident now, though still modest about it. The long shadow of exile has faded into routine, replaced by innovation. In office towers, engineers build microchips smaller than raindrops. In night markets, teenagers test bubble tea flavors the world hasn't imagined yet. In between, grandmothers gossip about television dramas while slicing mangoes with surgical precision. If you listen closely, you can hear the new heartbeat. Steady, pragmatic, hopeful. The island has learned that stability can be revolutionary too. Now, across the water, another morning rises over Shanghai. Brighter, louder, restless. The skyline flashes with ambition. Glass, steel, cranes perched like herons on unfinished rooftops. Street sweepers in orange uniforms move in precise patterns. Vendors fry dumplings beside skyscrapers that still smell of concrete. China, by the early 2000s, has entered its own golden rush. The country feels young again, hungry in the way only rebirth can be. Farmers become entrepreneurs. Students become coders. Poets become advertisers who sneak metaphors into slogans. The cities never really sleep. They simply dim for a few hours like lanterns saving their fuel. And yet, beneath the noise, Both shores share the same dreams, the small, ordinary ones. Parents saving for a child's piano lessons, lovers meeting at train stations, the quiet miracle of grocery shopping after a long day. It's funny how history, after all its storms, settles into such gentle routines. The two Chinas, once defined by ideology and exile, now compete over who makes the better smartphone camera. The same Mandarin ads play on both sides, promising happiness in 45-second bursts. Even their pop songs rhyme, but the mirrors aren't identical. Taiwan, with its democracy, feels like a cozy apartment filled with open windows, sometimes noisy, often heartfelt. Mainland China feels like a vast house under renovation, every room glowing with potential, though dust still floats in the air. Both homes, in their own way, are alive. Let's linger a moment on a Taipei cafe in springtime. The owner is an older man, his hands wrinkled from decades of brewing oolong tea. He plays Teresa Teng's songs on a cassette deck, older than most of his customers. A group of students sit nearby debating politics softly, respectfully. They're free to disagree, and they do, but always with smiles. The owner listens, pours another pot, and hums along. Now, drift across to Beijing. The same afternoon light slants through smog and plane trees onto a university courtyard. Students crowd around a phone laughing at a viral video of, who else? A Taiwanese pop idol. The accents are different, the jokes similar, the laughter identical. Somewhere between them, the strait shrinks a little more. The 2010s turn into the 2020s. The world outside watches these two mirrors with fascination. One island thriving in quiet defiance. One giant moving mountains with speed. They trade, they argue, they inspire. Each defines itself partly by how it differs from the other. Yet both find comfort in being understood only by the other. Imagine, for a moment, standing in an airplane halfway between Taipei and Shanghai at night. Below, the dark sea glitters with fishing boats. Above, the cabin lights glow soft and gold. Around you, passengers sleep, each dreaming in their own language, yet all lulled by the same hum of engines. You can almost believe the world is one continuous place, stitched together by sound. That's the strange piece of modern life. Connection disguised as distance. Of course, the politics haven't vanished. The two sides still speak in firm tones about sovereignty, identity, recognition. But beyond the podiums, people continue to live, texting across borders, collaborating on art, swapping recipes for dumplings that taste the same no matter where you fry them. I once read about a chef from Taipei who opened a restaurant in Shanghai. He said the hardest part wasn't visas or taxes. It was explaining to customers that the Taiwanese-style beef noodle soup they loved had originated in Sichuan. It's all shared, he said, smiling, just cooked with different memories. Different memories. What a soft way to describe history. In both Chinas, those memories ripple through the generations. Grandparents tell stories of flight or famine. Parents remember ration coupons. Their children know only full bowls and touchscreen phones. Yet even the youngest still look to the moon during the Mid-Autumn Festival, wondering if loved ones across the water see the same glow. The moon doesn't need passports. Let's slow down again. Breathe in that image. Picture Taipei's skyline at dusk. The 101 tower shining like a slender candle. Picture Shanghai's Bund glowing gold beside the dark river. From high above, they could almost be the same city, reflected in a tilted mirror. Both surrounded by water, both chasing the same horizon. If you listen to the wind, that eternal historian, You might hear laughter from both shores blending somewhere over the sea. The words dissolve, the tones merge, until it sounds like one long sigh of contentment. This is what peace really sounds like. Not treaties, not anthems, but the rustle of everyday life continuing despite everything. The hiss of steam from street food, the murmur of a train pulling into a station, the quiet click of a lamp being turned off. And maybe, somewhere out there, an old soldier lies awake, remembering the night he crossed the strait so many decades ago. He wonders how the two Chinas grew so alike and so different all at once. He smiles, turns over, and lets sleep finally find him. That's the lesson of the two mirrors. The reflection changes, but the light stays the same. Now, as this chapter closes, picture the sea once more, not as a barrier, but as a sheet of glass between two faces leaning closer, curious, kind. Above it, the same stars hang over both lands. Below it, the same tides rise and fall. In our next quiet journey, we'll follow those stars backward through time, to trace how both shores began to tell their stories to the world, not as rivals, but as neighbors learning to share a dream. For now, let your breath slow. The lights of both cities shimmer, then fade. The strait hums its low, patient lullaby, and we drift onward, together, toward the next dawn. Good evening, my friend. You've made it all the way here, or perhaps you floated in and out, catching only glimpses of voices and waves. That's all right. These stories are meant to be soft places to rest in, not puzzles to solve. If your eyes are heavy, let them stay that way. The history will drift around you, gentle as the tide. Tonight, we are no longer on one shore or the other. We're looking up, where both coasts share the same sky. It's the sky of one world, a long stretch of pale blue in day and deep indigo at night, stitched with clouds that move freely, belonging to no one. Imagine the year somewhere around now. It's evening in Taipei, and a light rain has just stopped. The air smells of pavement and spring onions. Commuters hurry beneath umbrellas. Neon signs flicker back to life. In a high-rise apartment, a young woman sits by her window, scrolling through her phone. She pauses on a photo of a mountain in Fujian, her grandfather's hometown, and saves it without knowing why. On the other side of the strait, in Xiamen, a man her age stands on a pier, eating roasted chestnuts from a paper cone. The wind lifts the smell toward the sea. He looks east and wonders what the island looks like at night. Both of them, in their quiet moments, are doing the same thing. Looking, imagining, remembering. That's the truth of this century-long story. It keeps returning to ordinary people. Governments speak in statements, but people speak in glances and sighs. They build bridges out of recipes, songs and photographs. The world around them has changed faster than the moon's reflection on the water. China has grown immense, its cities glowing like constellations seen from space. Taiwan, small but luminous, has become a workshop of ideas and inventions. Both thrive in their own orbits, spinning under that same patient sky. Listen to the night sounds of each. In Beijing, the distant honk of traffic, a bicycle bell, the hiss of dumplings meeting hot oil. In Taipei, a dog barking from a rooftop, the chirp of scooters, a lullaby from a nearby apartment. Different rhythms, but somehow the same melody. If you close your eyes, you might not know which you're hearing. You'd only feel the heartbeat of a people who have learned again and again how to continue. There are still tensions, of course. Statements made, warnings issued, headlines written in bold letters. But below those words, life goes on quietly. Cargo ships cross the sea with fruit and machines. Tourists photograph temples whose stones have seen empires come and go. Couples marry, babies cry. Someone burns incense for ancestors who once tilled the same soil on both sides. History, like sleep, is a cycle. You wake, you dream, you wake again. Never quite in the same place, yet always somewhere familiar. Let's walk a little through the modern mainland. The cities are brilliant now, skyscrapers taller than clouds. But beneath them, tucked between alleys, old tea houses remain. Inside one, a group of elders plays mahjong. The tiles click like rain. They talk about prices, grandchildren, weather, never politics. One of them, an old soldier, sometimes stares toward the south, as if listening for a distant tide. Meanwhile, in a Taiwanese town, a retiree sweeps her doorway. She was born after the war, but carries stories her parents never finished telling. Every year during festival season, she folds paper boats, places tiny candles in them, and lets them float downstream. She says it's for luck, but perhaps it's also for remembrance. Small lights heading out to sea, toward a place she's never seen, but still feels she knows. The water between them glows with those imagined candles. They drift together, flickering, meeting for a moment before vanishing into the dark. You can almost hear them whisper as they go. We remember, we forgive, we go on. That is the quiet genius of people who have survived too much history. They make peace not with treaties, but with time. Now picture a festival night shared unknowingly between the two coasts. Fireworks bloom above Taipei, red and gold. At that exact instant, fireworks burst above Fuzhou for a local celebration. For a few seconds, the same colors hang over both skies. The light travels, reflected in the sea, merging before it fades. If the ancestors could look down, they would smile and say, "Look, they still remember the colors." There's humor too, gentle and grounding. The internet connects both places now. Memes travel faster than mail ever did. A joke about bubble tea or traffic jams crosses the strait in seconds. It's a quiet kind of diplomacy. Laughter instead of rhetoric. And when typhoons sweep through, as they always have, rescue teams and weather bureaus on both sides watch the same storm maps, sharing data without fanfare. The clouds don't recognize borders either. They form, they weep, they drift away. Sometimes, late at night, university students in Beijing video chat with friends in Taipei. They talk about music, about exams, about how hard it is to find decent coffee. None of them feel like enemies. They just feel like people growing up under the same digital sky, curious and kind. Perhaps that's what the story has been trying to tell us all along, that identity is not a wall, but a garden, sometimes pruned differently, but rooted in the same earth. Take another slow breath. Feel the air around you settle. The story is winding down now. The century of conflict has softened into a lullaby of coexistence. The strait is calm, the cities glow, the people sleep. Somewhere, an old radio plays a song from half a century ago. The lyrics speak of reunion, of crossing bridges, of the moon's round face. A grandmother hums along in her sleep. Her granddaughter, hearing it faintly through the wall, doesn't know the words but feels the comfort all the same. One sky, two dreams, that's how it ends. Not with finality, but with continuity. Each shore keeps its rhythm, but the stars above them move together. If you listen, you can hear those stars hum. The sound of peace being practiced, one quiet day at a time. So now, my friend, let your thoughts drift upward to that sky. Imagine its vastness, its calm patience. You belong there too, among the stories that keep turning toward light, May these memories guide you into peaceful dreams. And if you drifted off somewhere along the way, that's all right. That means it worked. Thank you for traveling so gently through history with me. If this calm journey helped you unwind, let me know below. Only if it feels right. Sweet dreams.